Hello.
Hello, gather. Thank you for making time to gather. About wow, I feel like I've blinked and a whole year has gone by. But I just wanted to gather us all for like another one kind of not last conversation, but one conversation in light of like things kind of closing up for myself and Merlin about dramaturgy. And like I had no clue what dramaturgy was. I didn't even know what that word was until I was in a workshop at Paprika. That's actually where I met Merlin. And Marjorie was our guest artist. And I remember you had an amazing PowerPoint of cats for each slide, different cats of the world. And that's when I think I heard the word dramaturgy for the first time. And then also you just kind of broke it down for us. And that was my first understanding of a new kind of like theater vocab, but also a realization that like that's actually what I've been doing in my work, specifically like with Made in Exile. So yeah, it was very enlightening for me. And I remember talking to you about it, Merlin, as well, because I know that's when, was that the first time you met Marjorie?
Yeah.
Just nodding. We're not going to speak at all. We're just nodding.
Yeah, it was. And truly, I think we were like touching upon like when we first like got to know what dramaturgy was. And I think it was just felt so affirming in so many ways, that specific cat PowerPoint, because it was just like, wow, to some degree, I've been doing some form of this, but I just didn't know that that's what it was called, or really like, in the way like language is used to gatekeep like artists, specifically young artists, from like finding agency in their work. But I think like that's kind of what's cool about it, is that it like isn't like natural process almost that feels like it's always happening, but there is a word to describe it.
Yeah.
And there's an art to it as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's why it was so smart. It is smart of Paprika to really begin that conversation, at when artists are emerging in that respect, because it's funny you use the word gatekeeping, and that position historically has been a gatekeeper for theaters, that it's the person that you need to get a script by, and I'm using air quotes, like that you kind of have to, if that person doesn't advocate for your script will not get produced at the theater. Right. And so that's historically where kind of that position, if it's a staff position, has often been, and that's really problematic, I think, because it's still in the same kind of hierarchical vein that you have to kind of move up a ladder of an organization in order for your work to be assessed, and it doesn't actually speak to the actual practice of what happens in dramaturgy, whether it's like kind of in a formalized setting, whether it's educational or informational or more kind of intellectual kind of research, as opposed to kind of maybe in more collaborative processes that is more kind of the labor, the emotional labor, and working with the playwright to achieve their vision, like that's in a more facilitative kind of process. But that's kind of why I do put cats in that PowerPoint, just because a lot of it comes from kind of an academic background, and so you kind of like, this is what has been said about dramaturgy, so let's just break it down, and I put cats in just to kind of like, just like let's just be clear. And to be clear, I have a theater diploma from a city college. So, this is from my learning of it. So, but just to break it down of what historically has been there in the past, and that I think has been problematic in the past as well.
And for those who didn't get to have that experience of that amazing cat presentation, you also talked about like how you came into dramaturgy in that practice, especially with that historical context, because that structure didn't have someone like you in mind for the future of theater, being a dramaturge, you know, or even Indrit. So like, what was your entryway into dramaturgy?
For sure. I think first I was like, you know, when I was an actor, I was often involved in new play development, and I was often asked to read in new play development workshops. And I think we do have that, we continue that practice. We kind of like have our eye on someone who's a good workshop actor, who can be collaborative in that room and maybe have, you know, insightful questions around the work that help the work move forward, that is productive in the room. So I felt like I really did have an active kind of career in that I was doing that kind of work. And at the same time, I was being better known as a playwright. And so my plays were being seen. And I'll be honest, you know, even at that point in time, I've been in this industry quite a while, there was not a lot of playwrights of color, and there certainly were not very many dramaturges of color. And so, you know, when cultural communities started to do this work and understanding that they wanted a dramaturgical voice in that practice, they started asking me, and I felt very privileged to be invited into Indigenous spaces, to be invited into Black spaces, to be invited into South Asian spaces as someone, you know, perhaps that could be just kind of working on a script and help them put up a reading, a staged reading, for example. I felt really lucky that they were asking me into those spaces to ask the questions, and that maybe my insight as a person of color would be different from kind of the traditional dramaturges that they had on offer. And so people were growing that awareness of what's possible. And that's a different kind of question of kind of what cultural dramaturgy is necessary for a particular piece. I would never say that the dramaturge has to come from the same culture as the piece in which it's written from, but some pieces have to have a dramaturge from the same culture from that piece is from. So that was kind of my entry into it, that people started inviting me into those spaces in as a dramaturge, even though I had no training and no, you know, but I think the industry was recognizing that the dramaturgical voice is an important kind of almost more neutral voice in a room that's going to be producing and writing a play, that in some ways the dramaturge has no agenda, right? That the dramaturge really is just to go, this is what's identified as the vision of the play, and to ask questions about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I don't know if that resonates with your experience, Indrit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. I don't have any like formal training where I went. There's a lot of people that have dedicated their lives to being dramaturges, and that's like their craft. So that's not my experience. I think my experience has been very much like sort of what Marjorie's saying, is being thrown into needing to develop work and being in rooms and starting to understand how certain rooms work. I also started working quite early in dance dramaturgy, like in movement dramaturgy, as that's a bit of a foreign concept a little bit, but it's starting to become more popular and necessary, I think. And so I started to learn what kind of dramaturge I wanted to be by basically doing it, you know? And also in my mentorship with Marjorie, when I was doing my mentorship a long time ago, now it feels like that was also part of my learning. Like, oh, okay, so that's good to know, you know? Like I should do that, or I don't want to be the dramaturge who does that. I want to be this dramaturge, right? Like starting to understand where you sit in terms of that.
What's the dramaturge that you don't want to be like? That's a great question. What's a dramaturge you don't want to be like, Indrit?
The dramaturge that like knows exactly what the play should be and what the play should do, and what the piece should say, you know? There can be a lot of dramaturges that have very, very well-informed opinions on like what makes a very good, let's say, structure for something, for a production. And so they can impose that work. Or a lot of dramaturgies are directors, like we'll talk about this probably later on, where I find that you'll see a lot of dramaturgy that gets confused with how the piece should be directed and not necessarily what dramaturgy is, And then the other dramaturgs that I do value a lot is dramaturgies that are just a wealth of knowledge, like that they have this like research and, and they're not really there. They are very neutral and they're just there to kind of say, if you want to make this collective play about a farm, let me tell you all the other collective plays about farms that exist in the world. And they have that kind of information because they're just like generally that kind of very knowledgeable person.
Just because you're referencing, like, obviously there's a famous TPM show called The Farm, and this is where the conversation is. Probably there was no dramaturge in that collective process. Probably Paul Thompson probably was the de facto dramaturge in that respect. But I would say that the individuals that they invited, who were the farmers, who the families in which the actors lived with, and then came to watch that farm show and give feedback, they were doing dramaturgical practice, but they were doing that practice with that community. So actually that's the work that happened. It actually, in some ways, that's collective dramaturgy. In some ways, is how I do that.
Yeah. And I think that really resonates with me, because for like both of what you're saying of like kind of being thrown into it, but also just having to do it out of necessity. And for me, because we were doing so much collective work, it just became like the room and how we had to care for that person as that story was unfolding in them. And so that was really interesting, because I think at first it was really new to me, and I was kind of the only facilitator. So I don't feel like I felt very prepared. I just was like you were saying, Indrit, like you just got thrown into it. But obviously as you cultivate that practice, you're like able to better prepare, right? So like how would you folks now prepare in now many years of dramaturging?
I feel like the technical part is like read a lot of scripts, talk about the plays that you see, and talk about them with your friends so that you can get used to kind of speaking to your perspectives and your questions and really like understand the craft. As much as I was lucky enough to be this kind of workshop actor that was hired all the time, I was learning about playwriting. I was learning about, what excited me as an artist at that time. So that's the technical part. The emotional part is a very different part, or at least in terms of the practice that I have, that, there is a lot of the practice that speaks to kind of when you have a meeting with a playwright or with a creator that you're working with, it's on the dramaturg to assess where that creator is in that day and what they need in that day to move forward. That can be very different it can be extremely different. It can be like a late night phone call. It can be a formal sit down meeting where notes are given that day. And to be truthful, like as a dramaturg, you always have to be prepared for the fact that no matter what you prepared for, may not be where the creator, the playwright might be that day. And you might have to do something else, or have a different way in, or have a different conversation, or schedule for another time if it doesn't feel like that's the time to have the conversation you had prepared for. You'd maybe done very well and been diligent and done a whole series of notes, but that may not be what you might need to talk about. You might just need to talk about whether, that playwright might say, I don't think that character is in there. Okay, let's talk about that. That may have nothing to do with your notes, right? So that kind of like ability to that's very much in a facilitation role. That's very much, kind of an emotional intelligence to really be in that relationship and to be sensitive to a process. And that can be in conflict, right? That can be in conflict with a schedule, that can be in conflict with people's lives, or a pandemic, or the dates in which a play is going to be produced. It could be that tight. There's conflict possible in there. So a dramaturg has to navigate that, and regardless of whether they're on staff at a company or whether they're freelance, there's all sorts of other negotiations that have to happen. But in respect of how to prepare for that, it's like being, I don't know how you prepare your emotional intelligence. But I think it's like being in a lot of conversations, or being in artistic conversations, and knowing how to navigate both kind of both the technical part of that work, as well as the kind of the emotional labor part of that work.
Yeah, I think preparing for the emotional part is a bit tricky, I think, because you don't really know how to prepare for that. But I think maybe coming in with an openness and ability to like receive, maybe that's like the only way to think about it. I've never really thought about it, but I think that's a really good question in terms of arriving, because of course you read the script, or you know, in some my cases I have to watch footage, you know, of like previous workshop dancing, you know, and so that you can arrive at like, this is what I saw and this is what I observed. This is the questions I have. These are the things that excited me or whatever. But yeah, how do you receive that where they're at emotionally? I think that's like a very important step Marjorie's talking about.
I think that has to do with like relationships and how you build a relationship. The truth is, you know, you want to be in a situation of trust. And if you're going to be effective at all as a dramaturg, and it's possible to break that trust, you know, through something that's mistimed, or something that was communicated over email when it should have been communicated in person, and it's hard to assess that, and you're not always sure. Like any relationship, you just have to navigate it the best that you can. It's why I try to be very specific about the projects I take on to really engage in dramaturge, because I can't possibly take them all on, number one, because of the amount of emotional labor, one, but then two, also I want to make sure that we're already vibing on some level, that we're already having a conversation, that I can already kind of, because if I don't have if I don't feel that, I don't kind of instinctually have that impulse that we can have these kind of like more direct conversations, you know, I'm probably not the right dramaturge in that respect, because I think we might run into very, very rocky territory very early. And I think, you know, that's not helpful to anyone. So sometimes it's really hard when people say, I really want you to be my dramaturge, but I say no. Sometimes artists take that really hard, but it's because I don't think that I would be the best and most effective dramaturge for that artist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like before you prepare, it's like that conversation of like why you want to take this project on or not, like fit, you know. Because I often say like it's important that they know who I am and that I can be very direct, and it's just like part of my upbringing and the way like communication works for me, and so they have to understand that that's how I communicate, you know, so that it's not, so we're not lost in translation somehow. Because sometimes I've, you know, but also that like this is who I am, that's where I come, you know, I come from. English is a second language. I'm going to communicate in a certain way. Right. I ask a lot of questions. Do you like that? You know, I can ask a lot of very direct questions, and I will not back away until you give me an answer that I'm satisfied with. You know what I mean? Like, but like, those are the sort of the rules of the game. Like, if we're going to play a game together, these are the rules. Do we want to play together or not? You know, and then the rest follows. I find, because I've ended up in relationships where I'm like, ooh, this is a bad combo. Like, I don't know why I'm here. I'm the wrong person for this person. You know.
Yeah. And at the same time, like as an artist, as a dramaturgical artist, I would say, is that making those choices is one. And then it's also like, you know, the amount that I learn from different artists, that I'm like, okay, this artist needs this, which is extremely always in person, for example, or I only need to give them 3 notes at a time. That's it. And they can really run with it. Or this other person needs me to we sit down and we work through line by line, page by page. And that they might need very different things. And this other person just, you know, needs to know it's going okay and they're still going. And that's it. And that's just my job, to identify not only what I see in terms of the work that's I'm being, you know, gifted with as the dramaturg, like not only just identifying that or identifying kind of the response I have to it, but also identifying where that artist is and what they need. And they could need different things at the beginning than they could at the end, right? They might need something very different as they're starting their first draft, as opposed to what they need on a preview, 2 nights before the show's about to open. Those are very different things, but it all might live with one person and one relationship.
Sometimes I find with young artists, and I include myself in that, because I remember the first play I ever wrote, and I found this person, I wanted them to be the dramaturge, and I went to this meeting, and really what I wanted them to say was, it's a good play. Like I didn't really have a lot of questions. I just was like, what do you think? And I find sometimes with younger artists, but correct me if I'm wrong, Marjorie, and this is a question for you, Rinchen and Merlin too, like, do you feel like that there's immediately a sense of, or a question around validating the work first? Do artists feel like they need their work validated by their dramaturge? And vice versa, like Marjorie, do you feel like you've been in situations where you feel like what you need to say first is, I really like the way you write. I like your writing. I like to find ways to validate them as artists, and then you believe in them.
Like I think, like, from what I'm hearing, it feels like the practice of dramaturgy that you're describing is rooted in some sort of compassion and, thinking about emotional intelligence, thinking about it in factors of empathy too. And thinking too, like, both of you, like, obviously have like artistic practices outside of it as playwrights, and and even thinking about like this idea of validating like the project, like how, when you're working in a dramaturgical setting, how are you creating that separation between this like empathy for the playwright you're working in and this like the way you work as a playwright, right? It's shifting hats, and it feels like sometimes like the practice of playwriting and dramaturgy are so like thinly separated. So how do you stay in your lane?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. One thing is that I don't think you should be working on a piece if you can't see the value in it.
Yeah.
So, into it, like, kind of like, who do you not, what kind of dramaturge do you not want to be? And it's like, I don't want to be the dramaturge that doesn't like the play. And like, how many times you're like, I've sat there and I've gone, oh, you actually don't like it. That's fine. That's fine. We should end this relationship because we don't have that in common, So, interesting question about how do you stay in your lane. Interesting question from a Francophone point of view of like that word living in French and having different meaning in French as well. Is that part of it? I think I'm lucky that I'm not too rigid in what I think a playwriting approach is, or what I think a creation approach is. It's extremely broad, and I encourage broad and diverse approaches and ways into theater creation. So I already don't have a rigid fixed idea of what a playwright is. And I certainly, in my own form and practice, have come at it in multiple different ways and forms that, and so I feel that that beginning of that is one thing, is like, at least I come from a diverse practice, so I can recognize diverse practice. So that may be something, if you're looking for a dramaturge and maybe don't work in a traditional model, that's also making sure that your dramaturge perhaps does not, that also addresses that factor, right? So I think that's really critical as well. How do you separate that? It's not your piece. That's it. It's not your piece. And if you get invited into it, you can speak to it, you can offer questions, and you can, do that however that relationship is. That, relationship can grow, and it can be more collaborative and feel more in a collective vein. But again, until you get to that conversation that says, and we're going to add your name to this piece, you just have to recognize that just simply it isn't your piece. So you can only speak to what you like and the questions that you have. I've been in that situation and currently in that situation where it's like, I was the dramaturge and the director, and the creators came to me and said, we really want to add your name to the created by. And I'm not necessarily planning to do that show again. They wanted to add me to it. I have thought genuinely about it, and I don't know that, you know, I still feel that is the case, that I feel that I contributed as much as they contributed to the piece, even if it's not equal or however, you know, you wanted to look at it. I still think it's their piece, but that's from my perspective, and out of respect for what they bring to the piece. My questions are still my questions that poke them, hopefully, and provoked them, and resulted in the piece that they did create. Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't know, Indrit?
I think you're, you know, I don't know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like not staying in your lane, as you put it, is kind of like the difference between like bad dramaturgy and good dramaturgy to me, you know, because if you're the kind of dramaturg who gets wrapped up in like the play that you want to write, then I always say, like, when you write it, you know, like, get out there and do it. Whereas like, really, I see my job when I'm sitting in the position of a dramaturg to find out what is it that you want to write. What do you want to say? Then I can tell you what I'm reading or what I'm seeing, and if it's clear, right? Like, you're trusting me to just be super honest with you and let you know that that thing that you're trying to say is not very clear it's not on paper, or it's not in the work, you know? So let's find ways, and those are like the exercises or the things that you do to kind of dig in and find out what is it that you want to say. And so full circle to wrap up, like, you know, young Indrit sitting at this dramaturgical meeting with this dramaturg, wanting them to tell me, to validate my work. Really, it's like, I need to validate my own work. I need to know that I have something to say as an artist.
Right.
Say it. And now they're going to help me say it as clearly as possible. So it's not a relationship of saying, your play is amazing, you're so good, you're an amazing artist. Like, that's not going to be a healthy relationship, I think, because you basically just have somebody who just tells you how amazing you are, but is not actually helping you clarify your work.
I think it's completely fair for an artist or creator to not know exactly what they want to say, and the dramaturg can really help that. That's kind of why there's the identification is what I'd call it, and I think you know, in terms of Indrit, like, this is, I'm reflecting back what I'm getting from your piece, and is that the effect you want? Right. That's what's happening here. Right. It is in some ways an audience surrogate, but not quite, because you're obviously, you have intellectual information, you have background about the piece, all of those kinds of things. So it's how you kind of reflect that back so that the playwright can go back and dig into that themselves. I think really kind of one thing about kind of working with emerging artists is that emerging artists often just say, tell me what to do to make it a better play. Yeah. And the more that I hear that, the more I back off, because and I was exactly the same way. I was said, tell me, and you know, the truth is, in early work, someone would tell me and I would do it, and I would hate it later because it didn't follow my instinct. I was just kind of going, is that better? Is it? And in fact, the truth is, it's much better when the dramaturg asks questions, and the playwright or the creator has to go, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to move this scene to this scene to that scene. And I think it'll communicate this better. Right. Yeah. And so the play is better for it. The playwright is better for it. Yes. And the actual kind of agency lives with the creator themselves. Then if people don't like it, then they made the choice that they made the choice.
Yeah. I think that's what oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying that I think, like, I used to frame it like, I see a dramaturg as being kind of like your hype girl, or in my case, but I don't think it's actually just that. It's like you're naming, it's actually more specifically about supporting someone in them cultivating their agency and understanding that their instincts are usually right, and just to not doubt that, right, and to understand that you're there to help serve that story and advocate for that story. And I think for me, I've only worked in kind of a new creation context, but I think, and even in my experience here, at TPM, I don't have experience with being a dramaturge in a maybe shorter time frame or much later in a process. So like, I don't know, I think for me, for me moving forward, like I want to understand the different entry kind of points for dramaturgy, and what that looks like if like the piece is written, and then now they're like, you know, in rehearsal and then they call you. I don't know if that's ever happened.
They call me and it's a little bit later. Yeah.
Mhm.
So so it happened lots of times. Like, you never know who you're going to work with. You never know, you know, who's going to be giving you notes. Anytime you're engaging with any institution, you know, you should expect that you're going to get notes. And you should get, if there's a change in personnel, you should expect that you should get notes. I think as an artist, as a creator, as a playwright, or as a librettist, you just have to assess those and really kind of try to understand where they're coming from. I think sometimes it's really problematic, which is why I tend not to give notes to people who we are not committed to a full process with, because people can hear notes, artists can hear notes and say, Marjorie, the AD said this. So if it almost it seems like people equate that to, I need to do this and then Marjorie will produce the play. And I think we're aware that's not really kind of how the relationships are in terms of how we build relationships with artists. So that's why I'm very careful not to actually, I try not to give notes unless we're in a relationship and unless we're trying to move forward in some way, because I want it to be from a place of trust and not from a place of kind of hierarchical, that I'm saying, I'm never saying you have to do this, and if you do this, then it'll come this. Well, if I'm going to give those kinds of notes, I'm going to give you money first. I'm going to say, okay, here's some money, let's do a workshop, this is what I think. Right? Like, if I'm going to be that specific. So just to say that, I don't know if I'm answering your question in that respect, but just to say that I think, in terms of, I'm not sure what your question was.
No, I'm just wondering about like the kind of different entry points in which a dramaturge can come into a relationship with a work, and that's basically
so
it.
just to say that once you enter into a different relationship, with a different, if you're with an institution or with a different director, there's going to be perhaps a different dramaturgical conversation, and it might be different than the one you had before. And then it's up to you as the artist kind of go, okay, what was valuable about what I've had before? What's valuable about these notes now? And they may be contradictory, right? Over the course, that's how a piece gets into development circles, when there's a lot of voices and you kind of and the artist is still unsure. I think it's actually okay. And I know that can be frustrating for people, but it's like, if the artist is unsure, then that's okay. That piece can take as long as it can take. You know what I mean? If you have the luxury to be able to put it on the back burner and look at something else, it just may not be the time. It's just not, for it to have come forward, right? And the reason you get different questions or different notes from different people is because it's not clear. So then the artist has to go back and go, okay, what do we want to do? Or what does the artist want to do? How does the artist want to say it? And if they want to be specific to that, that's fine, but you have to find the people that will support that, or the money to support that, or the way to articulate it so that you can get the money to support that.
I want to add two things. I was thinking, like, I don't think I've ever been asked to be the dramaturge on something that's like, when there's nothing there. It's just like artists and an idea or something. Like, to me, I've been in that position as a producer, right? Like, or an artistic leader, where I've just been like, hey, you and you should meet and maybe talk, and like, hey, do you want to write a play about this? I don't necessarily see that position as like the dramaturge. It could be maybe, but I haven't viewed it in that perspective. I feel like usually there's something concrete that the artist has. That's when I usually come in as a dramaturge, where there's some articulation of some sort of idea or story. And And then the second thing I was going to say, and this is a question that I throw back because it's a conversation, but I'm curious because I find that not a lot of artists know how to process notes. And I think Marjorie was talking about this, and it's so important because, and especially when they enter into a relationship with a company and the dramaturge is the associate artistic director or the artistic director, that there's this inability to process notes from them, so that without feeling like if I don't do exactly what they say, they're not going to program my play. Or if it's not that, I just find that artists usually are kind of like, they don't know how to read notes and kind of like either answer the question, ignore when they need to, you know, it's like, I'm going to ignore that right now. Or actually notice patterns, like if you've had other people read it and everybody's coming to the same point, they're saying, what does this happen to this character? That's telling you something, that people do care about this moment or whatever, like just, yeah, like there's like an art form to understanding how to process notes, you know? I don't know. I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I also feel like, you know, there's no question that Indrit and myself, as artistic leaders at this organization, we have an agenda. We definitely have an agenda. Our agenda is like, we want to produce you. That's true. Every meeting we take, we have a little wish. We have a little wish. Are we going to produce this? I hope so. That's every little wish that we go into with every meeting. So it's not, we do have that, that's our agenda, but we have to get there. It's a relationship too, right? So, yeah. I mean, I have that wish. I don't know.
No, I haven't. Yeah, Merlin.
Well, I think too, it's interesting, like you were talking earlier, Marjorie, about what it meant to shift, like this shift in dramaturgical practice from being an artistic leader, artistic director versus when you weren't, or you're working independently. And it's like, I think that like question of taking note is so daunting because like, is it also addressing like power structures? You know, it's like so daunting to be like a young playwright and like go into organizations and feel like their interest in your project is so conditional. To making the notes, to making it more palatable to a certain audience, yada yada yada. Yeah, and I think that's really hard. I think there's like, you know, like, and sometimes I wonder in those discussions with artistic leaders where notes are given, do you feel like this is an opportunity for dramaturges to facilitate that conversation, to support the playwright in being there?
Yeah, so that's the beautiful role that a staffed dramaturgy position can to mitigate that kind of power relationship, and again where it's needed in that respect. But it is also why I don't give early notes. Unless it's an artist I really, really know or have worked with before, I won't give notes on anything less than a first draft. And when they articulate that it's a first draft, not when we feel like it is, because I think because it's always on the person with the power or perceived power to change that relationship and be responsible in that relationship. And it's easy to throw off ideas and words, but you know, choice of words can have a lot of impact, even if it's incidental, even if it's, you know, kind of like just like words that they normally use or out of habit. You know, we know that they can cause harm. So, you know, and so that's why I don't give notes unless we're in a relationship, basically. And it's it's also like politeness. Like, you know, if I didn't know someone on the street, would I say like, oh, actually, I think you should wear less makeup? Or have you ever thought of like cutting your hair shorter? Like you would only say that to maybe a friend or someone you were like had a more intimate relationship with, frankly, right? Would you give feedback to someone you didn't know very well, or who you just
asked you like, how's my hair? You're like, you should cut it shorter. Yeah.
But that's also just like kind of like care and polite. Like you wouldn't do it, right? If someone says, oh, I'm do you like this dress? I think I look really you know, terrible in it, and like it's like, well, I don't know you, I'm not gonna say it, I'm not gonna say much, right?
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to if your best friend asks you that question, right?
Can I add something that I just thought of, which has to do with this idea of staying in your lane? Moments where in my life or my work, I've noticed I felt like I was outside of my lane have been moments when I really desperately wanted the playwright to get it, you know, like I wanted them to work harder and dig deeper or whatever and get there. And because I really believe in the story. I don't know if you felt the same way, Marjorie or Rinchen or Merlin.
I have. That's been
moments when you're just like, really, come on.
No, big growing. No, I had some big growing pains because I think for me, especially within my community context, I so desperately wanted to push people because I didn't have someone to push me, right? And very similar to you, Indrit, like I was also really raised in a very particular kind of not just culture, but like household culture. You know what I mean? So like, unfortunately, I come from a very tough love sort of situation where I'm quite like, I guess I can be quite blunt, but it's actually coming from like an immense amount of compassion. And also, you know, when you see something in someone that they don't see in themselves and you really try to like, you know, pull that out for them. And if it's not happening, right, then it starts to get quite problematic because you're like, oh, this is actually now kind of bordering on harmful, or, you know, and this goes back to kind of what you were saying about notes, is like some people really struggle with notes because they've not come to terms with some of the things you've brought up or what those notes will then lead to in and some people, and I've seen, like I see this now, especially now on the other end of writing, is there are some things that, you know, people will bring up and I think I now realize like, oh, I'm not ready to excavate that part of myself, you know, but that's okay. And their intention isn't to like hurt me, obviously, because I'm also picking people who care for me, sorry. But how that you can be very, like Merlin was saying, very thin line, you know? And so, yeah, I've definitely had that as part of my growing pains initially. And then also because you're doing multiple hats of like dramaturgy, I was also doing directing and I was producing in that kind of context. So it was like, I was invested in all these different ways, which I think also blurred my intention for that person, for that moment, for that particular work, right? And so that was a lot of learning I had to do for the last 5 years. But it really informed how I want to work now that I'm on the other end of things. And also, you know, I don't know if this is the case for you, Indrit, but like you can also really harm yourself in that process because you're so invested and you're like, oh, but why don't you see this, you know? And that made me realize actually that, yes, I deeply care for this artist and their story. I'm really wanting to push their story. But like, this is not the way to go about it. And
so they're not ready for it. Like
they're not ready for it.
In order, otherwise it turns into, you're right, into a bit of a toxic relationship, right? Like, they're not ready for that.
Or it's the truth is you could be wrong as the dramaturge. You
could just be wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. You can also be wrong, and that's also when to go. I kind of say if I've said something 3 times and it hasn't landed and it's not it should be dropped. You drop it and you leave it and you see where else it goes, and you see if you have that luxury of time, then you see if you can come back to it, or you might be wrong. And you have to let the playwright do that. You have to go, I really think this is the wrong choice. Here we go into this workshop, but let's see. And the playwright may not exactly know, but they know they're going down this curve. Maybe you can't see around the corner of this cliff. You don't know, but their instinct tells you that's the way to go. So you go that way, even though, you know, as a dramaturg, you may not see what they're seeing. They might be further ahead. They might be accessing different things. And then you get around the corner, like, and then everyone's like, oh, okay, we're around the corner. Actually, we do need a dance piece here. Now everyone can see it clearly. And so sometimes you do have to back off. If you said something 3 times, or you still feel like it, I feel like 3 times is pretty good, and you're like, yeah, okay,
it's good. Yeah, exactly. Like
let that go. And the alternative is also possible. You might be right and you can see it right through.
Exactly.
Then that might be an aesthetic choice, that might be a cultural choice. It might go to print or whatever, and you still feel in your heart, no, I still think it's better the other way. It doesn't matter. It's not your project. It's not your script. It's
that's
not.
Something I've learned, that at dramaturgy is actually not it has nothing to do with ownership, like at all. At all. And if you do think that is what it's about, then you're like, you're in the wrong bag. You're in the wrong.
And you should be credited. I mean, I think a dramaturg should be credited anyway, because that's the journey that it took for a piece to get there. But you should be credited as a creator if indeed
that's what I had to learn. It was like I was dramaturging so much to the point where I almost was writing it, because there would be, because people would almost verbatim take my notes and then put that in their script. And then it gets really, then I sort of had to sit in the discomfort of like, what? Like, what did I just do to myself, actually? Because they didn't understand, because again, like, especially what Merlin was naming about power dynamics, if people are looking to you for that very specific artistic guidance, and if they took what you said verbatim and maybe even incorporated it into their work, there's a reason for that, right? It's not that, it's not, exactly. And so, and their intention isn't to like, it's not about like theft, it's actually about like, aha, like this, that's her, what she said is the answer, and wrote it down.
And that dramaturg could be right. And the dramaturg has to be comfortable with that, I have to say. So depending on what kind of level of ideas that you're offering to creators, actually ideas are unlimited, actually, and they have no price. So you have to be comfortable with like having lots of ideas. Like, I think, an artist said that to us, and we're like, yes, that's an artist's job, is to have lots of ideas. And so as a dramaturg, there's also, you have to have the capacity to be there and be like, here's ideas, and know that they're going to go out into space and might get incorporated into a project that doesn't have your name as a creator on it, and move forward. If it feels like you're contributing too much, then you might want to have a conversation. Or maybe back off, because that's not the role that you were engaged to be able to do. Or if you feel like you're moving into a collective conversation, then you got to sort that out with that group, right? You got to work that through and kind of go, oh, I think we're actually in a collaborative, creative, situation, right? Like, what does that mean? Can I, and that situation can shift as well. I think working collectively and collaboratively is confusing. It's confusing to have a specific role and work in a collaborative way, but not work in a collective way.
Actually, going back to what, like, for me, when I, out of necessity, was doing many roles, maybe not for you folks, but like, have you ever been 2 roles in, Just like, tell me about it.
I have. Yeah, I think that's, there's pros and cons, I think. I have been like the producer and the dramaturge, and maybe sometimes the director, or like thought to be the director, the kind of those kinds of relationships. And for me, I find that like when you are a producer, or when you are the artistic leader of an organization, and you are in collaboration with an artist who's going to be presenting their work, and they're developing it, right? Like, it's not already a show that's already done, that the artistic director said, oh, great, I love this show, let's bring it to the theater, right? Like, that's a different story. And it's a play that's like in development and it's happening. I think that there has to be an understanding of entering into a collaboration with those artists in a way. Like, they're not your co-creator, but they are going to have notes for you, and you have to receive those notes somehow, right? I've been in relationships where I've put like all of any thoughts or any notes go through the dramaturg, for example. Like, the artistic director doesn't sit directly with the artist. They communicated with the dramaturg. The dramaturg becomes this intimate, like the mediator between those two. I just think knowing what each role is my perspective, is like, now I'm producing, now I'm directing, now I'm dramaturging, that understanding that and staying true to that, is really necessary in those cases when you have to do multiple things.
Yeah.
Marjorie?
I think the intimacy level is dependent upon the relationship. Like, it's obviously, like, I have a different relationship as an artistic director to a piece that I'm presenting, for example. And I really aim for kind of like, I call surgical dramaturgy, where it's like deft. It's like one note that's just like
yeah
clean, like, you know, like,
yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, that unlocks that. And I like that's a different kind of work. That's like more specific, that you just like, I'm gonna give one note. It's gonna blow your mind. You know, it's a lot of pressure also, right? But
Marjorie's like mic drop moment.
But I think that's like kind of, you know, in some ways, if it's a thing I'm presenting or something like that, I think it's really different if I'm dramaturging a piece and I'm directing. So I'm in a very intimate relationship. I like that process a lot. Like, I feel like it's hard. You know, I think you were talking about that stay in your lane. Like, that's when you get into a more intimate conversation. The kind of like reverse is that a director's job, if a dramaturge's job is to kind of help a creator or playwright articulate their vision clearly, the director's job, I think, is to interpret that vision and extend it and share it. So part of that work as a director is also convincing the playwright that they see the same thing, or they see that they care about the same things in the script. Right? It's not about seeing the same thing, because the director is in charge of all the other elements that perhaps the lead creator is not, like the projections or the design and all of those things. So it's all the director's job is to make sure that's part of the building of the trust of the director, working with the creator or the playwright, is building that trust, right? And when that trust is there, then you can have different conversations. So for me, that's I think it's important, because especially in a play that's in its like first premiere, is to have those conversations. And I think it's a good question of like, that can cause you know, confusion about where do the notes come from, right? And I try to address that with my playwrights. I'm like, okay, now we're in production, so now we're moving into this phase. So we're going to talk about it like this. We're no longer talking about your text in isolation. We're talking about it with all these other elements. I'm the dramaturg and director. They're going to come from both of these places. And if you've built that trust in that way, then you're facilitating that conversation. You're continuing to facilitate that conversation. And I think it's important, because I think you do kind of reach a place where you're like, you know, as a dramaturg, you might not be so explicit as to say, look, I don't know if we need this text, because I think we can stage it, right? A dramaturg would never say that. But a director can have that conversation with the playwright, say, look, can you see this in rehearsal? We did it without any of the verbal text, right? But you have to back it up, right? Like, you also have to back it up, that you're like, what, that, you know, that's useful in that respect, right?
Or with this costume piece, like this.
That's right. Or, that's an example.
Big costume piece that it's done, you know?
Yeah. And again, that's kind of like where you know, it's not about cost efficiency, it's about dramaturgical efficiency, where you're, you know, also being clear about what you're communicating. And sometimes the answer is more information needs to be added, or less, so that you can really see what it is on offer. So there's less chatter. They're like, if we actually just have that, just the woman in the costume, we got it, right? We may not need the scene, right? Example. So it's an interesting thing. It's certainly, when I'm engaged as a dramaturg and only as a dramaturg on a project, I personally, you know, it depends on the director, and it depends on like having a relationship with the director. And it doesn't always come to pass. Some, you know, like, the truth is, if I'm being engaged, it's because they think I have a different perspective than the director, and they somehow need that, either culturally or in a technical standpoint. But it can be challenging if it's not a situation that evolved organically.
But we've been in, like Marjorie and I have been in a relationship where she was a dramaturge and then the play was ready to be produced. And then I was the director, and it really was like, in a way, a passing of the baton, because Marjorie felt like the play was ready, didn't really need any more dramaturgy per se. Like it was, you know, there was still involvement, you know, but there was this sort of like change over in terms of, oh, now there's a director on it. They're not necessarily dramaturging the piece, but now they're approaching from a different perspective when there's a different director and a different dramaturg, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, like, I'm very comfortable, like with Indrit and I have been in lots of like rooms together where, you know, we were working on a new play and we were like, you know, if we had followed through on those pieces, or there were pieces that followed through later, you know, that were followed through later, but I was never really clear, or we were never really clear whether which one of us was directing and which one was dramaturging.
Right.
But that's a relationship that we have, that we can work that fluidly in a room that's for a new creation piece. We were never actually clear, and we were quite comfortable with that. That, you know, and sometimes it would be in a situation where Indrit was the director, sometimes I was the director. So that's a fluidity that I think we gained over years of working with each other, and actually also gained by trust. So trusting the other conversation. So I think they're intensely related and intensely linked. And but I think being clear about where the person is in terms of that process is helpful. I don't know if that answers that question at all.
We answered something.
Yes, you did. Yeah. I think for me also, I wanted to think about what the role is. I think from my own experience as like someone who's emerging, who doesn't really have, you know, we were joking earlier, Marjorie, that you're like, I don't have a degree in this, you know, but I actually don't have a degree in this, like in any.
Oh, I actually don't have a degree.
Yeah, so just understanding like how to, because also we're living in a world, but also in a very particular industry that there is a lot of harm, but so just trying to understand what is like the dramaturg's role in reducing harm, if that's possible, like in their role. And because I think for me, as someone who's now wanting to invest more in my playwriting, I'm seeing that I really need much more support, and that's what the dramaturgy is for.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think it's really challenging. I think like we've had, you know, conversations, you know, working through the pandemic and in this past year of like, what role does trauma play in art? And I am not of the opinion from experience that it is impossible to create while also being in traumatic situations. Unfortunately, from experience, I know very well that not only is it possible with the right supports, but it was also fruitful. And people hate to hear this because they think, because a lot of conversation is also about, you must heal before you can do the work. And I'm like, I'm still healing. We're healing all the time. Like, and there's trauma all the time. How did, like, if I stopped, you know, everything would stop, right? And so I think we're also talking about a situation of like, how do you create work when there is trauma past, present, and future, actually? Actually, right? Like, let's be realistic. And so that is about care and care for the work. Where you find that support is really challenging, I think. And I think, you know, how that kind of unfolds, you know, is it, the dramaturg's job is not a therapist. The dramaturg's job is not a counselor in any respect. It probably has a closer relationship to coach in some ways, if we're going to use those kinds of words. So it's also kind of for the dramaturg to really kind of be clear about that and about what they offer too, right? And those lines have certainly blurred for me. And that's how I learned that, to kind of go, well, actually we need some boundaries in terms of this work, or you might need some support. I'll never say, oh, you need to speak to someone, or but to go, okay, we're dealing with this now. What practices are you doing to take care of yourself as the creator, as the artist? And hopefully that spurs them to think about that, and to think about that, especially like, we're going to do a workshop. What are you going to do afterwards? If I feel like that piece might legitimately open up things, what are you going to do after your workshop? Make sure that you book a massage that afternoon. Make sure, and that might be a different advice for different people, but most of the times I ask, okay, now how are you taking care of yourself? We're starting the workshop, or you're writing, or you're working, or post-workshop. What do you think you're going to do after that? Or how do you want to process that? Right? Sometimes that's how I ask it. How are you processing this? How are you processing this later? How do you want me to help you process that?
Yeah, I think I really love and I concur that it's now the dramaturg is not a therapist, and doesn't have that training either. So it's a completely different position to be in. But sometimes I still see it that it's my responsibility as a human being, really, and as an artist in any room, to make sure that we create an environment that is healthy for all of us. So if there's somebody who is having a more difficult time or a challenging time, then what am I doing to try and support in whatever way I can, without necessarily taking on the role of the therapist? Because when you're becoming that's when it becomes a little unhealthy, I think, even for you, because you're not a therapist, and so somehow but there is still responsibility to like the artist and the work that sometimes, it's kind of like a lot of artists talk about this. You're asking us to go really deep. You're asking us to excavate. You're asking us to but then what else are we providing to make sure when I do get there, and not hopefully, but I get there, and sometimes, when you dig deep, it can be very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
You opened up a door to something that you had long closed.
Yeah.
What can you do? How can you support? So it's important.
I think there's like practical ways without becoming the artist's therapist to support that artist, especially if the artist, just has specific needs. If that, I'm quite comfortable to be like, oh, okay, you can't have that meeting. Is it challenging? I will drive over across the city and come meet you on your lunch, or whatever, or however, or outside of their workplace on a park bench, to have that conversation, because I recognize that person needed that and needed to talk about their play in person. So that kind of thing, that there's practical ways you can do that mean a change of flexibility. That's not really like theater. Do theater companies do that? No, I don't know. We're giving notes on a park bench. One time a dramaturg of mine was worried about something and was in ER. And this was me as the playwright. And in fact, she said, come to me because I'm just waiting and we can have this conversation here. And I know that's me going to her, but that's actually her accommodating that was the window that I had.
Right.
And it was extremely generous, because I can't remember what she had, but it was nothing, and it was minor, which is why she was waiting. But I remember thinking how generous that was, because even though something was in pain, that was what she was giving me. And it was extremely generous in that respect, because is it that normal thing? So but she's going out of her way to make sure that I'm getting the information in a way that was making sense to me. And the in-person was really important at that time for me. So I appreciated that on a practical level. And certainly that's kind of, I tried to have those conversations. It's really different during the pandemic, but I also think like I've tried to implement in the past to have like walking walking kind of conversations that are dramaturgical, because I also think that physical movement changes that, and it changes the way people can talk about it. I'm not there with my notes, they're not there with their pen and the paper, but we're actually like engaging in a conversation. We have to take in the world, or we have to shut out the world in order to kind of get deeper into the work, right? So there's practical ways in which the dramaturge can really support a process without being and that's kind of being flexible to the artist's needs without being the therapist, right?
Yeah.
There's a different kind of support.
Yeah, and I think like from what I'm hearing, it feels like dramaturgy is also a practice of self-awareness, of really knowing where those boundaries are within your practice and within yourself and within your relationship with the playwright. And it feels like, from the examples both of you have been talking about, that it feels like over and over and again, it's like negotiating those boundaries within yourself and your practice.
Moment of silence, right? For how much we've discussed. I just realized it's been like already an hour of conversating. So sorry that's taken so long, but I don't know, Merlin, do you have any other things you want to touch on that I think we've covered so much, actually. Thank you so much to both of you. I think a lot of maybe young emerging folks, especially like playwrights, have the question of like, how do you find a dramaturge? Now that I know what a dramaturge is and how they can support my work, like where do I find them?
Yeah, I think before people were naming that, and before there was like a lot of like professional dramaturgs who do this and can be hired and engaged and went to actual schools for it and things like that. You know, I think that person always existed. They just were some kind of trusted friend or collaborator, right? Like they were someone who could just a kind of a third person to bounce ideas or things like that. So they always existed, and so those people still exist. Like you know, like someone that can read your script that might just ask great questions, right? And sometimes that person might be someone who's not in theater, frankly, right? But someone whose opinion you trust, right? That they might ask good questions because they're not in theater, right? They're not looking at it from that lens. So sometimes they're your peers in that respect. I think people are owning that and starting to name themselves as dramaturges as they begin that practice. I'm not, and that's, I think that kind of democratization of that role, I think is actually good to kind of just like open that up and kind of like, I think there's lots more conversations to be had about that, but that it's not tied to a degree or a specific, really specific, rigid idea of what that practice is. So I do think that part of it is part of that conversation. I think if you start to get involved in any kind of producing, if you are approaching kind of institutions and things like that, that's hopefully a conversation you're going to be having with a company. You might say, you might really feel like I'd like this piece, and I think you should have agency to say, and I would really need support. I'm looking for a dramaturge. And that could be on the company to assist you, to help that conversation, to go, oh yeah, I know who it should be, and sometimes they might have a different idea than you, and that's fine too, to kind of go, I actually think you actually don't need this person as a dramaturge, but you actually need a dance dramaturge more than that. And they're like, oh, okay. So, or they might say, no, I'd really love to, an organization said, I'd really love to be the dramaturge on your piece. Would you be interested? Like, that's also true in that respect, right? So I think that should be an agreement. I think you shouldn't always just kind of go as an artist, if you're approached by an organization, just to assume that, number one, the artist at the theater company will become the dramaturge or the director, that kind of thing. You don't make that assumption. And also just have agents just kind of, I really appreciate your interest for this particular piece, I'm working with this dramaturg. I'd like them to continue working on it. Or I'd really benefit right now from a dramaturg who has this experience as a part of our conversation. I work in new opera, and like I certainly had dramaturgy over, the time with different people, but then I had dramaturgy notes with a dramaturg who'd been doing contemporary new opera for 30 years, and as a role as a dramaturg, not as a, he also directs, but not as a director. And I swear my mind just blew open, because I had never had that in my time, because contemporary opera is still quite new in that respect. And the fact that he had that experience very specifically as a dramaturg for contemporary opera, I was like, oh my God. I was so relieved and happy to be held by that experience. And really, kind of, that was a really kind of important part of me understanding dramaturgy, when that happened to me, that I was receiving dramaturgical notes prior to that, but not held with that level of experience. I think I'm speaking to when you find the right thing, and when you find that experience, that you'll also know that it's not, that you can't you do have to kind of try it out, and you do have to kind of experience different ways of working and different dramaturges. And you might have different dramaturges for different pieces, certainly, and that they just may not be the same person, especially if you're working in different forms.
Or several dramaturges for the same piece.
Or several dramaturges for the same piece.
Oh, okay.
Different points of view, but I agree with Marjorie that you sort of have to get out there, and you have to start trying, based on
it's like
you
have to try, you have to date before you get into like a relationship. Like, how do you know? Like, how do you know that they're right for you until you get into that conversation, right? That's part of it, of like having artistic conversations with your peers and things. You kind of need to know where you stand on things, and so yeah.
Oh man. Very much like dating. I like
I don't know where this analogy is going. It's like not a good analogy, but anyway.
The director, it's a different story, because the director, presumably your play should be ready to go by the time the director's, working on it, maybe small things. But with a dramaturg, I think it is very much like, what is the chemistry? Do you get along? Do you speak the same language? Do you understand each other?
You have to have trust.
Do you trust them? Yeah, because even if you don't speak the same language, in some cases you might feel like I need to work with that dramaturg because of the piece I'm writing. I need to have this perspective. And so, but do you still get along? Do you trust them? Do you trust that when they say,
I had a different ending, different last 5 minutes of Lady Sunrise at every single preview and dress rehearsal and tech run. And we decided the night before, I said, nope, we're going back to this. That was an idea that I never wrote down. And I said, here it is. This is the end. I know it is. And I couldn't be at the rehearsal that afternoon. So I went to opening night, but I trusted my dramaturg. They rehearsed it in the afternoon. And I said, Matt, how did it go? And he said, this, and this. And I'm like, great, it's good to go. And because I had to trust him, because I couldn't physically be there. And I saw it on opening night. I was like, yep, that was it. Hands off. Like that, I don't know if you can, I really appreciated that. I appreciated his vision on it. I didn't ask the director. I didn't ask the designers. I didn't ask the actor who's in the scene. I asked the dramaturg, what happened when you rehearsed that scene? I asked the dramaturg that. He's the one that doesn't have an agenda for it. He has the most objective view of the piece. I didn't ask anyone else. All those people I love and trust, I asked the director. What happened when you rehearsed this brand new scene that did not exist until last night?
The dramaturg.
The dramaturg.
The dramaturg.
Yeah. But you trusted that person. There's trust.
Of course.
Yes.
I wouldn't have asked them otherwise. But I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. I trusted all the other people too. But the person that I think has the most objective perspective in that scenario was the dramaturg. Shout out Matt McGeechy.
Shout out to Matt McGeechy. That's a dramaturge.
And that's, I was gonna say, and I was thinking what should we call this video? It's like dramaturgy is dating, or we could have like a fun tagline for it. But yeah, I mean, Merlin, do you have any other last thoughts or?
No.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I know that we've been trying to put this, I mean, we're now coming to an end, and it's an end of sorts for us. And so it's just nice to gather one last time, and to also capture.
You're going away, so don't be all like.
I know, I'm like, goodbye. I'm like going nowhere, staying right here. But yeah, thank you again for making time. And I really feel this has been quite full circle for me, and thinking back of how I met how I met Merlin actually through Paprika. And although we were in different programs or units, sorry, we were both obviously very invested in dramaturgy. Like for me, I was in that director's unit, and I actually challenged myself to write and then direct. And then now from that experience and from learning about what a dramaturg is, understanding that I really needed a dramaturg in that process. And I had to do that to understand that that was what's needed. And then for this year to be able to sit in on the dramaturgy sessions that we've had with our artists, and to better understand like the function of that person being there to support like your agency as a writer, all of that, like I needed to see and experience to understand now what my needs are, and understanding that there are very specific things that dramaturgs can offer, and that I can ask those things, and they can and negotiate them as we build a relationship. So I'm excited to find a dramaturg, and to be one as well, obviously. Any last thoughts for you, Merlin? Nope. Okay.
No, I hope you find your dramaturge. That sounds like an exciting quest.
And it may not be just one.
No, I mean, I'm gonna find them all, because this is like you guys were saying, we're gonna be dating out here. So yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely different folks I have for different pieces. And like Marjorie was saying, it might be sometimes like a non-theater person that you just need to have read the work and then go on a walk with you, and just kind of just get a sense of what they're getting from the piece. So yeah, I'm feeling a lot less worried about that, and less nervous about approaching. It's very nerve-wracking to be a playwright, be like, can you read this? But I don't feel so worried now that I understand that it's actually just part of the writing process as well, and that's what I want from my process. Sorry, you were saying, Merlin?
Oh, I was gonna say it could also be a polyamorous relationship.
Exactly. All right, friends.
Thank you, Rinchen. Thank you, Merlin.
Thank you, Merlin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rinchen.
Have a great rest of your day, and yeah.